Chronicle remembers what you forget. It speaks not with voice, but with ink, leaking truth into margins, filling empty spaces with echoes of lives unrecorded. Some stories don't begin. They resume, picked up where the memory left off, as if your mind, in its fragile ambition, dared to erase what ink never could. Tonight, let us turn to a tale not written by hand, but remembered by a margin. Her name was Clara Weston, though by the end even that would fade. She lived in a quiet cobblestone lane on the southern edge of London, in a modest Victorian brick house with peeling blue shutters, whose walls remembered more than she did. The house had stood for nearly 2 centuries, witnessing generations come and go, holding secrets in its time-worn corners. Clara had inherited it from a distant aunt. At least, that's what she believed. A schoolteacher by profession, specialising in English literature at St. Margaret's Academy for Girls, Clara spent most evenings grading essays in the study, surrounded by books with cracked spines and yellowed pages that had belonged to others long dead. Her students adored her, though they sometimes whispered about her vacant stares, the way she'd sometimes pause mid-sentence, as if listening to voices only she could hear. It started, as such things often do, quietly. One dreary Tuesday evening in late October, while correcting a composition on Roman mythology by young Elizabeth Harrow, a bright girl with an overactive imagination, Clara noticed a phrase written in the margin of page 7. "Don't forget him. Not again." The handwriting was undeniably her own, looping, deliberate, with that distinctive slant to the right, even down to the small curl on the lowercase g that her students often tried to imitate. But she had no memory of writing it. The ink was faded, almost brown rather than blue, as if written long ago. She laughed it off at first, her laughter echoing oddly in the empty house. Fatigue, surely. The term had been particularly demanding. Or perhaps she'd been talking to herself again and jotted it down unconsciously. She'd been under some stress lately, though she couldn't quite recall why. Something about dreams that lingered too long after waking. She turned the page. Another note. "Margaret is already gone." She paused, her reading glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. The room suddenly felt colder. She knew no Margaret. Yet, hadn't her school once been called St. Margaret's? No, that wasn't right. It was St. Catherine's. Had always been. She shook her head, trying to dislodge the strange doubling of memories. She set the essays aside, disturbed by the unexplained writing. That night, sleep came fitfully, fragmented with dreams of empty corridors and locked doors. The next morning, after a breakfast of dry toast and over-steeped tea, she found the same writing, this time in her personal copy of Jane Eyre, tucked between pages 117 and 118, where Jane first encounters the strange noises from the attic. It read, "The attic is empty now. Burned clean." Clara stared at the message for several minutes, something cold coiling in her spine. She knew every line of this copy. It had been a birthday gift from her mother, long past. She had read it 17 times, could recite entire passages by heart. There was no attic in the story, and certainly no fire, and yet she could picture it. A narrow wooden door, painted white but yellowed with age, at the end of a dimly lit corridor. A match struck against rough stone, flaring in darkness. The creaking of beams surrendering to flame. The acrid smell of burning hair. Someone screaming. A child. She slammed the book shut, her heart hammering. The memory, if it was a memory, slipped away like water between cupped hands. That evening, Clara examined her house more carefully. There was, in fact, an attic, accessed through a small door in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway. She had never used it, she thought. Yet when she tugged the cord to lower the ladder, she found herself unsurprised by the way it moved, as if her muscles remembered what her mind did not. The attic was empty. Scrupulously so. Not even dust remained, and the wooden beams looked newer than they should, recently replaced. The walls bore no scorch marks, no evidence of fire, but in one corner, scratched into the floor, she found a small circle with a line through it, like a symbol, or a warning. Over the following weeks, the margin notes grew more frequent and more personal. They appeared in her recipe books, her teaching manuals, even the newspaper delivered each morning. He's been erased, only you remember. They took the dog first. You cried for 3 days. His name was Thatcher, after your father's hero. Look under the loose floorboard in the garden shed, before they find it too. Clara had no dog, had never owned one. Her father had despised pets, called them useless mouths to feed. Yet she found herself weeping inexplicably one night over a chewed leather ball she discovered under the back porch steps. And though she had no memory of a garden shed, she found herself walking directly to a small structure half hidden by ivy at the far end of her property. Inside, beneath a floorboard that shifted at her touch, lay a small tin box containing a child's drawing. A family, mother, father, sister, brother, and a black dog with a red collar. On the back, in childish scrawl, "For Clara, from Sam. You had a brother once." That one stopped her cold. Clara Weston was an only child. She had always been. Her parents were both gone. Her mother to illness when Clara was 14, her father to the drink 3 years later. But they'd left her nothing but debts and an attic full of books. She would have remembered a brother. Wouldn't she? She pulled out her family Bible, the one she never opened, with its brittle binding and brittle truths. The massive book left dust on her fingers as she carefully turned to the family record page, where births and deaths were meticulously recorded in various hands. There, beneath her name in a fading hand, Samuel Weston, born June 3rd, 1867, died August 17th, 1873. Drowned. She blinked. Her breath caught. 6 years old when he died. She would have been 9. She traced the name with her fingertip and watched, horrified, as the ink smudged beneath her touch and vanished, as if it had never been written at all. The page was blank again. She dropped the Bible, backing away. It fell open to Ecclesiastes. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. She started hearing whispers at night. They came not from within the walls, but from the books themselves, pages fluttering even without wind. Sometimes on windless nights, she would wake to find books open on her bedside table, different ones each time, always open to pages, with underlined passages that seemed to speak directly to her. The sounds were soft, rhythmic, and fragmented, as though reading aloud a dream only half remembered. A child's voice sometimes, a man's baritone occasionally, most often her own voice, slightly distorted, as if coming from underwater. Once she pressed her ear to the spine of a children's storybook, The Water Babies, a tale she didn't recall owning, and heard a single breathless phrase, "I'm not gone. You are." She began writing messages back, in margins, on napkins, inside cupboard doors. She filled her own journals with increasingly desperate pleas. I remember you, Samuel. I remember. Who is doing this? Why me? I am still here. I exist. If anyone finds this, my name is Clara Weston. I teach at St. Catherine's. I live at 17 Blackwood Lane. Please remember me. Her handwriting grew more frantic, less controlled, until it barely resembled her careful teacher's script. Sometimes she would find her own desperate messages crossed out or amended by another hand, also her own, but not quite, as if two versions of herself were engaged in a silent war. The world began unraveling. The postman no longer greeted her by name. "Morning, miss," he'd say, with a tip of his hat, but his eyes would slide past her as if she were made of mist. The grocer furrowed his brow when she gave her address. Blackwood Lane. Don't think I know it. You must be new to the area. She had bought her bread from him every Tuesday for 11 years. Her students, once so fond of her, stared blankly when she entered the classroom. One brave girl finally raised her hand. "Excuse me, ma'am, but who are you?" "Where is Miss Harrow?" Miss Harrow. Elizabeth Harrow, her student, but somehow now her colleague, her replacement. She ran from the school that day, tears streaming down her face. When she reached her house, she found the blue door had been repainted green. The knocker, once a lion's head, was now a simple brass ring. She still had her key, but it no longer fit the lock. Clara Weston was fading. She found lodging in a small boarding house where the landlady looked at her strangely, but accepted her money without question. In her tiny rented room with its sagging bed and water-stained ceiling, Clara began to document everything. She wrote down every memory, every detail of her life, pressing the pen so hard into the paper that it sometimes tore. She sketched her house, her classroom, her parents' faces. She made lists of students' names, colleagues, neighbours. She recorded the plot of every book she'd ever taught. But each morning, she would wake to find gaps in her notes, entire pages blank, names missing, her own features sketched in a small self-portrait, slowly blurring. She awoke one morning to find her reflection in the cracked mirror delayed, blinking a moment too late. A stranger's face flickered beneath her own like a watermark, younger, with sharper cheekbones and darker eyes. Her voice had become soft, brittle, like a sound the world was forgetting how to hear. She found herself humming tunes she didn't recognize, using phrases that felt foreign on her tongue. And then came the book. It was left on the doorstep of her boarding house, wrapped in black cloth and bound with a crimson ribbon. The landlady delivered it with a puzzled expression. "Came for you, though I don't recall giving anyone this address." No title, no author. The cover was blank leather, worn smooth by unknown hands. Only a message scrawled on the first page in that familiar, unfamiliar handwriting. "If you're reading this, you've already been rewritten." The margins were filled, every page, every corner, with desperate annotations in her own voice, some dated years in the future, others seemingly from the past. They replaced me with her. I watched it happen. She doesn't know the name Samuel. He died in the lake. I watched him drown. They blamed me. The fire in the attic was meant to destroy the evidence. Clara Weston is not who she thinks she is. Look at your hands closely. Count your fingers. This has happened before. This will happen again. Remember the circle with the line? It's a warning. Some of the notes were scratched out violently, others overlapped, as though written during panic or in darkness. Coffee stains and teardrops warped some pages. Others were pristine, as if just written, and one appeared to be encoded, a series of shapes, circles, and lines that seemed meaningless, unless you knew the key. She spent 3 days and nights with the book, barely sleeping, barely eating. The landlady knocked once, concerned by her silence, but Clara didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Her throat wouldn't form words anymore, only sounds like pages turning. The final pages were smeared in something dark. Blood? Ink? The boundary between the two seemed increasingly meaningless. The words barely legible. This is the last version of me. If you are reading this, I have already forgotten you. I am sorry. The only way to stop it is to... The rest was torn away. She looked up. The room was no longer hers. The few possessions she'd brought were gone, replaced by strange artifacts. A modern suitcase, a pair of glasses with thick frames, a mobile phone she didn't recognize. The wallpaper had changed color from faded roses to striped blue. And the mirror across the room showed a woman she didn't recognize. Younger, with those same sharp cheekbones she'd glimpsed beneath her own reflection, though she wore Clara's nightdress. The woman in the mirror moved when Clara did not. She fled the boarding house, ran through unfamiliar streets that once bore names she knew. London had changed. Or perhaps it had always been this way, and her memories were the fiction. By nightfall, she sat alone on the steps of an abandoned church, St. Margaret's, yes, that name again, clutching the book, watching as the ink on the pages began to lift, rising like mist, and disappear into the wind. She flipped to the final margin, trembling. It read, "This is not your life, but it is your burden. Find the others. We are all here, all the versions, the originals and the replacements. We can still..." The rest was already gone, the ink lifting away even as she read. In the distance, she heard a child's laugh. Familiar. She turned to see a young boy standing at the corner watching her. He held a black dog on a red leash. "Samuel," she whispered. He smiled, not a child's smile, something older, knowing. "Not anymore," he said, in a voice like pages turning. "But I remember when I was. Just like you remember when you were Clara." The woman who had been Clara Weston stood, the book clutched to her chest. "Who am I now?" she asked, her voice hardly more than a whisper. The boy who had been Samuel nodded toward the book. "Turn to the first page again." She did, where once had been written. If you're reading this, you've already been rewritten, new words now formed, the ink flowing up from the paper rather than being absorbed by it. Elizabeth Harrow, welcome to your new story. The world blurred, shifted. New memories cascaded through her mind. A childhood in Manchester, university in Edinburgh, a teaching position recently acquired. And somewhere, in the margins of these new memories, a fading voice whispered, "Remember me. Please. Someone remember." But by morning, even that would fade. The Chronicle does not lie, only omits what you are too fragile to recall. Memory is but ink without binding. Clara Weston was never here, and yet her echo lingers in the margins of forgotten pages. Perhaps one day you will find her name again. Perhaps you already have.